All right, I'm going to try to teach you guys jurisdiction. People have questions about like why do certain courts get to do certain things and why are there California claims in a New York court? And I get it. And these are complicated concepts, but I'm going to try to break it down into pieces. So I think that maybe you can grasp sort of the stuff that matters, the bigger picture. But I need you guys to stick with me because these concepts build on one another and you can't just go from here's one of the rules to here's why you can hear a California state law in a New York federal court. Like you're going to have to follow the syllogism and it's going to take a little bit. When I teach this at the college level, it takes like a month. So I'm going to try to do it in a couple of videos, but I need you guys to be patient with me. If you don't have patience or you don't care about this, just scroll past these videos and don't bother. If you do, I would just ask that you stick with me because I promise eventually I will get there. Okay. For a court to have the authority to make a decision in a case, it has to have two kinds of jurisdiction. It has to have subject matter jurisdiction and it has to have personal jurisdiction. It has to have both. Lawyers, there's venue, I know, but we'll talk about that later. A court has to have both jurisdiction and authority. Jurisdiction is just authority. Jurisdiction over the legal issues in the case, the subject matter of the case, the claims, right? What are people claiming? Which laws are they saying were violated? And it also has to have jurisdiction over the parties in the case, over the people and the entities in the case. If it has one but not the other, the court does not have authority. It has to have both subject matter and personal jurisdiction at the same time. I'm going to start with subject matter because I think it's easier to start there because personal is where it gets a little bit more complicated and I think personal is easier to understand if you get subject matter first. So pull all the way back to how do courts get authority in the first place. Courts get authority in the first place from, in the United States at least, from constitutions. There's the U.S. Constitution, which creates Congress, the federal legislature, and also creates the federal court system, okay? The U.S. Constitution gives authority to the federal court system to decide certain matters. In the U.S. Constitution, there are certain things that they decided were just going to be the province of the federal courts. But it also gives authority for the federal legislature, for Congress, to make laws, and that for the interpretation and enforcement of those laws to go to federal courts, right? So it goes Constitution, legislature, court system. So the court system has the authority that has been given to it by the Constitution. In the United States, we also have 50 individual constitutions, and therefore we have 50 individual court systems. So you have, for every state, you have the state constitution. The Commonwealths are a little different, like Massachusetts and Virginia and Louisiana is a mess. But generally speaking, you have the constitution of a state that creates a legislature. That legislature has the power to make laws for that state. And the court system that the Constitution creates has the power and authority to interpret and enforce that legislature's laws. Okay? So each constitution gives power to the courts underneath that constitution, to the court system underneath that constitution. And I think this is the part that everybody kind of gets, right? We have 50 separate court systems for our states, and then we also have the federal system. So we have 51 court systems. There's actually like branches of the federal, like tax thing and immigration. Anyway, just think of it as 51, okay? We have 51 court systems. We have each individual state, and then we have the federal. For each individual state, I think this is the easiest for everybody to grasp, right? If the Colorado legislature passes a law under its authority under the Colorado Constitution and somebody wants to sue over that law, the courts of Colorado should be the ones deciding about a Colorado law, right? Same thing with South Carolina, same thing with Oregon, whatever. I think that's pretty easy for people to understand. Generally speaking, You cannot have a court in Colorado enforcing or interpreting a law that was made by the Georgia legislature for the sole purpose of making laws inside of Georgia, right? So each individual state has its own system. And so each individual court system automatically has subject matter jurisdiction over the laws of that state. So all Kentucky courts have subject matter jurisdiction over cases involving Kentucky law, right? This is what fucks people up. When you go to the federal system, the U.S. Constitution gives power to the U.S. Congress and to the federal court system to decide issues of federal law in general. And federal law applies everywhere because it's federal law. So it applies to all of the states, right? So the subject matter jurisdiction of federal courts is the federal laws and issues of federal constitutionality and other things that are specifically in the U.S. Constitution. It calls some certain things out. But because federal law applies everywhere, and because federal courts are everywhere, federal courts have subject matter jurisdiction everywhere. If a federal law is violated, it doesn't matter where in the country it is. In a federal court, that court will have subject matter jurisdiction over federal claims because every federal court has subject matter jurisdiction over every federal legal issue. You with me? So when you are thinking about subject matter jurisdiction, do not think about the people. Do not think about the parties. Do not think about where they live. Do not think about any of that. Think about the system. Subject matter jurisdiction is a question of the system. Is it a federal system issue or a state system issue? You are deciding which court system has jurisdiction over the legal issues in the case, not physically where the court is. Okay? So is it federal or is it state? So when we're talking about federal courts, there's a part of it that's very simple, right? It's called federal question jurisdiction, which operates just like state court subject matter jurisdiction. If it's an issue of federal law, it goes to a federal court, right? And there's 4 types of federal question jurisdiction. There's people asserting violations of the U.S. Constitution. There's people asserting violations of federal laws, federal statutes. There's people asserting violations of U.S. treaties with other countries. And there's people who are suing the federal government of some type, right? All of those things are the province of federal courts because they are asserting violations of federal law. That makes all the sense in the world, the same way that the Georgia courts can hear assertions of violations of Georgia law, right? There is a 5th way to get subject matter jurisdiction in federal courts, and it's called diversity jurisdiction. And the reason it fucks people up is because it sounds like personal jurisdiction, but it's not. It's a type of subject matter jurisdiction, even though it has nothing to do with subject matter, okay? So diversity jurisdiction in federal courts is where the parties on either side of the V are from the United States and another country, or 2 different states. Because if one party lives in one state and one party lives in another state, it wouldn't be fair for either state's courts to have subject matter jurisdiction over the case because somebody's going to get fucked. So what we do is we pull that up to the federal courts and say, if everybody's from different places, that belongs in federal court. And we call it subject matter jurisdiction, even though it's not really about the subject matter. The only thing that's about the subject matter there is that you have to have at least $75,000 in controversy because the federal court doesn't want your penny ante, parking ticket claims. They want the big stuff. So federal subject matter jurisdiction is all of the subject matters plus diversity of citizenship. And you got to hold on to that because when I get into personal jurisdiction, they're going to blend together. But let me know what questions you have so far.